So this is the next in our series of lectures, the Provost Lecture series. And so I want to thank you all for coming here. I think this topic is going to be critically important. As you may recall, the primary objective for this series is to provide you all, our UTMB faculty members, with expert perspectives on some of the major issues that academic medical centers are facing today. I think I'm especially excited, and I think I am especially excited to introduce today's speaker because he's someone I've had the pleasure of knowing for many years, including when I was a faculty member at the Brigham and also when I served on the editorial board for the New England Journal of Medicine. I think you'll find he'll bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to his presentation, and I love the topic title here, Are You as Good as You Think You Are, Mastering Your Professional Skills? So Dr. Graham McMahon is President and CEO of the Accreditation Council for Continuing Medical Education, as you see on the slide, affectionately known as the ACCME. It operates not only as a regulatory body to organizations that offer continuing medical education, but it also offers expertise that serves to strengthen them by promoting best practices in innovation and education. In this role, then, Dr. McMahon is at the forefront of initiatives that support ongoing learning and growth for clinical faculty members, working to help them optimize their performances individually and in teams to help promote better patient care. If you speak with him, and I know many of you, hopefully a lot of you had a chance to talk with him, I think you'll find that he believes that continuing education can help us as professionals stay connected to our work, our workplaces, our work environments. It's also an opportunity for organizations to think about how we can create a better environment for our professionals. Dr. McMahon has said that early in his career, and I believe this is true, he learned the value of working in environments where education, engagement, and resilience were priorities. And since then, he's been passionate about helping others find their joy in their professional lives. We had a nice conversation earlier today where he spoke about the importance to him of impact, which is a prime motivator for him to occupy the post he currently occupies. He's a medical educator, an endocrinologist, and a researcher whose work is focused on systems of care for patients with diabetes. He joined the ACCME from Harvard Medical School, where he was Associate Dean for Continuing Education and also Associate Professor of Medicine. He's taught extensively at Harvard Medical School and at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. He also was editor for medical education at the New England Journal of Medicine, and he also served as executive editor for the journal's Knowledge Plus program. So I'm excited to have him here personally. Dr. McMahon, the podium is yours.
Thanks so much, Dr. Jacobs. I'm not sure I recognize that person. It really is such a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much, Dr. Jacobs, for inviting me, and obviously, big congratulations to you for your wonderful news just this last 48 hours. It is a delight to join you because I've met several of you today, and this is an organization that seems suffused with the shared passion for clinical excellence, but also for educational excellence. And to be surrounded by colleagues who share that passion and are motivated to drive that change in our organization and support our colleagues is really just terrific. So why don't we just get started with another provocative question. I know I put a provocative title on this of who are you as good as you think you are? But whether you think of nursing credits or medical credits or other professional credits, shout out, what words come to mind when you hear that word? CME or CNUs or? Confused? Love it, yeah. Come on, there's loads of words come to mind. I've heard them all. Licensure? Testing? Paperwork. We're getting warmer, good. What's that? Plenty? Oh, money, love it, yeah. What else? Requirements, good, yeah. Professional development, oh my God. Yeah, professional development, great. So compliance, money, regulatory, requirements, licensure. Okay. Brenda is a plant. So just, he's obviously a plant as well. So this is obviously a key issue for us, right? The educational infrastructure that we've built for our professional development, most of us as professionals, and this is true everywhere I go across the country, think of it as a regulatory and compliance system in many cases. And it's the first thing that comes to mind, not as the services and support of peers that drive us to professional excellence. And in some respects, we are at fault for having created such a system that we think of as a regulatory hammer, not a supportive tool. And that has to change. That has to change, because otherwise we are doing ourselves a disservice, because it's not what we're about. ACCME, as I think some of you know, we're the national accreditor for CME programs. We accredit about 1,800 different organizations across the country. We create those rules, but increasingly we've been, as we've been talking about with many of you today, progressively deregulating, removing rules, allowing and increasing flexibility, creating connections with other organizations so that credits can flow and be easily reported. So there's alignment and consistency across the professions. And increasingly, we've been working to try and support CME providers so they can put on strong educational programs to meet the professional expectations of broad communities. When we think of clinicians, though, many educators feel really delighted to be able to work with healthcare professionals. What is it about healthcare professionals that makes them terrific subjects for teaching and learning? What's that? Smart, okay. A lot of educational attainment has gone into these folks, and they've demonstrated their ability to achieve certain competency expectations. They're smart. What else? They're committed to their profession, and they're also committed to, by being committed to the profession, they're often committed to their learning, okay? So they're somewhat unusual across other disciplines in that they're generally not complacent about stagnation. They expect themselves to keep learning, and they are motivated for mastery. They want and they value the work that they do, and they have strong educational attainment. That sounds like a great ingredients to create a strong learning environment, right? We know, though, that there are many challenges. And if you don't think about these challenges when you construct educational programming, and you don't think about the burdens that many of our clinician community are under, then you'll end up creating something that nobody will be at and nobody will benefit from. And these are very substantial challenges. I think all of us in this room know that patient complexity seems to be getting higher and higher. I'm a diabetologist. I mean, if my patient isn't on 12 medicines and doesn't suffer from 5 comorbidities related to their diabetes, I don't know what they're doing in my office. And yet I'm trying to manage that patient in 15 minutes across the range of complexities and modify their behavior in the process. And whether you're in family medicine or you're OT or whatever, the patients that we're seeing are more complex than ever. At least it seems that way to me, and the evidence would suggest that's true. So the difficulty of the work is high. Productivity expectations are substantial. The administrative burdens, anyone? Our families expect us to be home more and present with our families more than ever before. And our patients expect more of us, not just that we're able to do that procedure, but also we're able to tell them about it, advise them about it, counsel them, talk to their family members, enter the data into our systems, manage the flow of information. So it's no surprise that clinicians can readily find themselves disengaged from their own professional development because there's so much else going on. And unless somebody's paying attention to it, and certainly if they're not paying attention to it, it's easy to put it at the bottom of the list. Increasingly, we also have problems of burnout. And again, this is not just true for physicians, it's true for every aspect of professionals in the healthcare workforce. But burnout is not an insubstantial problem because it changes the way clinicians view themselves, how activated they are to participate in their own learning, and their capability of learning. If you're burned out, the likelihood that your ability to make time to go to professional development activities, or when you're there to actually learn, or even if you've learned something to apply it in your practice, makes everything else much more problematic. But burnout also affects the learning environment in important ways. There's clear evidence that it's associated with not just errors and poor outcomes for patients, but increases in disruptive behavior. Burned out clinicians are generally not happy clinicians. And if you're burned out in your work, you often express that through anger or acting out behaviors. But they also get more isolated, they get sued, they have lower satisfaction, they get lower patient satisfaction scores, they're higher costs, and unfortunately, burnout, particularly if it's associated with these negative outcomes, can be associated with depression, exacerbate existing or perpetuate drug abuse, and even suicidality. We lose about 350 physicians every year to suicide, particularly women. And that's a whole medical school class or more. So these issues and how they affect our community, both in terms of the expectations we put on them, the burdens we place on them, and the effects of the burnout that those administrative issues cause, are very substantial problems for us as a community. Let me show you a little bit of a video. Let's see if this plays for me for a sec.
I was really proud of it. Everything changed though when my friend Barney called me 25 years later. Where I work, the welders are geniuses and they like to play jokes on the engineers. He had a challenge for me. He had built a special bicycle and he wanted me to try to ride it. He had only changed one thing. When you turn the handlebar to the left, the wheel goes to the right. When you turn it to the right, the wheel goes to the left. I thought this would be easy, so I hopped on the bike ready to demonstrate how quickly I could conquer this.
And here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Destin Sandlin. First attempt riding the bicycle.
All right. So the faster I go, the better. Yeah.
I couldn't do it.
So what's going wrong here, okay? What's going wrong? Why can't he ride the bicycle? Okay, his brain is trained a certain way. What else? He's practiced it a certain way. Why is he falling off the bicycle? You can see how the connections work, right? He can cognitively understand how those connections make sense and how you have to move the handlebar. I mean, it's intuitive, right? You just pull the handle the opposite way. Right, well, why isn't it easy? You're right, it's not easy. So muscle memory, essentially years of practice doing it the other way. Okay, what's that? It's got two wheels, true. Okay, but there's more to this than moving the handlebars, right? What else are the elements that he needs to master? He's got to retrain his brain, right? He's got to retrain his brain. There's balance here, the center of gravity. There's coordination between legs, upper body, arms. But it's a totally different way of doing things, right? Why am I showing you this video? So learning something versus unlearning something, which is easier? Learning something is easier. In professional development, what are we doing most of the time? We're unlearning so that we can establish new patterns. Are the practices that we have in our daily lives like riding a bicycle? There are multiple components. There's balance, there's strength, there's understanding, there's practice. And when we change things and have new information about practice patterns or psychomotor skills or a new way of doing a procedure or a new way of interacting with a colleague or a better way of communicating with the patient, we have to unlearn a lot of the standard practices that have informed the way in which we think about our work. And that's really hard. It's multiple times as hard as learning at de novo in GME or in UME or wherever you are. So we have real challenges at learning new material. The other thing that's worth recognizing here is that could you learn to ride this bicycle by observing how these cogs work? Could you learn to ride this bike by observing him ride the bike? No, okay? You have to ride the bicycle. You have to train yourself by doing and getting feedback. In this case, you fall off or not. So practice is an essential part of learning, but it's also an essential part, particularly of unlearning. Okay, different topic. Dinner, sweet potatoes, gallon of whole milk, bread rolls, leeks, whipping cream, meat, celery and carrots, a package of cubed stuffing, pumpkin pie mix, fresh berries, pie shells, frozen green peas, and cloves. Nice and quietly, seriously, get out a piece of paper or your iPad or your phone and quietly write as many of those things down as you possibly can. Don't talk to anyone else around you. You have to go and sit over there. Don't talk to each other. Just write it down. Anything that comes to mind, write it down. All right, so in your mind's eye, and before you talk to anyone else around you, just kind of put a line under that and count up how many things you have there for a sec. Just by show of hands for a moment, how many people have 3 or more things? 4 or more? 5, 6, 7, 8? Liars? No, sorry. No. Okay, and just take a look at your list before I'm going to get you to show it to the other people around you in a second, but look at your list and think about why do you think you remembered the things that are on your list? Okay, just for a second, just look at your own list and think for yourself, why did you remember these things that are on your particular list? What is it about them that makes them memorable? Oh, wait. All right, now what I want you to do is I want you to try and talk to the people around you and build out your list. See if you can add some things from the people around you in terms of what's on your list. So just by show of hands, how many of you increased the size of your list? How many people increased the size of your list? Did you increase the size of your list? All right, so there's a lesson there, obviously, but we'll come back to that in a second. But did anyone find something that was on their list that shouldn't be there? Okay. All right. Can somebody tell me something that's on their list and maybe a reason why they think they remembered it? Why should it be turkey? Okay, well, hold on. So who here thought Thanksgiving seeing that list? Did somebody a couple of people did, okay. Because it resonated for some reason with you, okay? So you thought turkey because... Okay. All right, who else remembered something? Yeah.
Leaks. I didn't know what that is.
All right.
So I did leaks too, but when I was much younger working in a grocery store, I remember someone brought that, and this is when you had to know what the vegetables were and the codes were, and she had leeks, and I said, what is this? And she said she didn't know, and I thought, well, then why the hell are you buying it?
But memorable because it obviously you had a story around it. Just think about this for a second. A story around it. We had context around it, Thanksgiving. We made attributions, yeah.
I remember the things I didn't like on the list, that I don't eat.
Things that you don't eat, okay. Let's just have a look at this list again, and then we'll I want you to see what things are on your list that shouldn't be there. Right, somebody must have something on their list that's not up here. Right, who will share something on their list that isn't up here? What's on your list? Cornbread, because? Okay, so errors of attribution, Brenda? Onions. Okay. All right, so obviously, this is a kind of a fun game, but what am I trying, why am I showing you doing this game with you? Okay. Okay, well, there's two things that we just heard here. Have to be careful about how you trust your own brain. That's definitely true, right? Our ability to remember something often isn't quite on. Now, our memory is much more likely to be effective if there's a story or a context. We've decided this is Thanksgiving, but context can also drive you to make attribution errors because you say, well, it's kind of Thanksgiving, turkey surely should be on there, or cornbread. If we collaborate with others who have different stories in their life, like a story of being introduced to leaks, we're able to do much better in terms of not only remembering lists and tasks, but we remember different things and we have different life experiences and different expertises that allow us to all build our lists and do a better job in completing a task. So there's several things in these little elements we've been playing with that I'm trying to get you to realize that our self-awareness is often not where it should be, and we have important opportunities for growth. Where's the hands? Okay, Erin is giving us a hand, but she's kind of alone here. Okay, so you have to know what an average is, okay? But I think a lot of us, at least when we shout at people when we're driving, we know what average is. We certainly know what below average is. But what's the issue here? Okay, and what's the relevance of this question to health professionals? Well, who's going to admit that they have a performance or productivity issue when we have such pride in our mastery and in our profession? Okay? How many competency domains are there for, let's say, an endocrinologist like me? 3? 103? 1,003? Just think of the things that I'm expected to be superb at. It's not just about providing diabetes care or managing a patient on an insulin pump. Just think of the range of competency that I'm expected to be able to demonstrate. And just think, can I be above average or perfect in all of those things? Can any of us in this room? No, of course not. Of course not. And yet we have this vision of ourselves as professionals that we're practicing at the top of our art, we're practicing at the top of our ability, and if anything bad happens, whose fault is it? Not mine. System problems, patient was very sick, patient was very unusual. It's certainly not me. Does anyone in this room have seen any clinician in the UTMB system that they wouldn't want their family member taken care of? Even if they were your division chair? No. But there are clinicians out there that we know don't have performance issues or behavior issues or communication problems or a variety of issues. So we know that there are problems in the system. We know errors are happening. We know that our clinicians generally are motivated for mastery. We know that it's difficult for them to unlearn and relearn and learn new things. We know that they learn better when we give them context and meaning and they learn together. But we know that they have problems with self-awareness and inflated senses of confidence that result in a mismatch between ability and competence. So we have a responsibility to do something. Do I have you? You with me? So we have important issues to address. We've looked at the fact that physicians and other healthcare professionals, sorry if this is physician-centric, they've certainly high attainment and capacity. They're motivated for mastery. but there's many competing pressures on them. It's hard to learn by observation. It's especially hard to unlearn. We all learn differently. We tend to learn better together. Context and relevance is very important. Self-awareness is often poor, and many view the system that's supposed to be addressing all of these issues as compliance rather than professional development. And we reinforce poor professional development by putting together activities that convince people that because they're in a room where somebody is teaching, they must be learning, right? That's a terrible complacency to be reinforcing in our educational environments. Whether that's medical students or graduate students or colleague nurses, we have a big problem. We've been doing it all wrong. And in an information age where information is no longer the currency of education, you can look up guidelines quicker than you can actually share it. And we don't drive problem solving as the primary way and wisdom development and as our currency. We're kind of missing the boat, and we put the wrong thing forward and created a compliance system. All right. So learning, though, can be transformative. One of the questions I get asked all the time is there any evidence that CME is effective? And my answer to that question is typically, do you send your child to school? Right? Why do we send children to school? To learn. Do they learn in school? Can humans learn? Okay, that's most of the time. Don't answer that question about healthcare professionals, but humans can learn. So humans can learn, obviously health professionals can learn. And the questions are much more important are, which are the most effective approaches to help them learn most efficiently and effectively? Those are interesting and important questions. But whether or not CME or educational interventions can be effective, that's a redundant and ridiculous question. But learning can also be a powerful force in an organization because it brings people together in many cases, just in rooms like this. Engagement, relationship management, driving self-awareness, ultimately trying to produce some learning model that creates improvement, ultimately change, and eventually better health for the communities that we serve. Learning interventions can be remarkably effective. And there's literally hundreds, thousands of examples of activities that span this entire spectrum to show that on a case-by-case basis, you put together the correct educational intervention, you can go all the way to the right here. You can do these things, and learning interventions and educational interventions and talent management for a workforce can be extremely important and effective. You put that in the context of thinking about the values or orientations of the organization. You want to work towards team-based care. You want to promote quality. You want to create an environment that's intellectually fulfilling for your precious and valuable talent that's here. You want to build relationships so it feels like a comfortable place where people can be at their best. In the middle of all of those expectations is a learning environment. And yet, we pay so little attention to it. Education by itself can mitigate burnout. Intellectual fulfillment, a feeling that your organization supports you, relationships with your peers, teaming, are all things that affect the way in which we perform and how we view ourselves and how we feel supported by our organizations. Well-structured educational support programs reduce turnover in organizations, save money in terms of cost retention, but also help to drive meaningful performance improvement for the organizations and help people feel sustained and engaged. So what's holding us back? We know learning interventions can work. We know it can be a powerful force in the organization, but we know there are many challenges. These are some of the reasons that we haven't grown. In some cases, it's because we are complacent, not just having individual areas for growth, but institutional areas for growth. We believe that because we've been doing it for a while, it must be effective, right? It's also impossible to really surmise what you don't know on the individual level. And in our environments, it's hard to identify individual underperformers using some of the tools that we have, but we're increasingly able to do that. We're often individually poor assessors of the extent of our own deficits and therefore won't engage in our own individual professional development. And there's no unique curriculum for professional development like there is in UME and GME, because those folks are learning to a specified curriculum, but you take one diabetologist and compare it to another, our curriculums and our needs are likely quite different. Our practice types are different. And you take that across the professions, you take that across the disciplines, and you have real challenges. One of the other things that's really important is this idea of self-awareness, and it really describes the importance of assessment. Because if you can drive assessment, you can normalize self-awareness with actual ability. One of the programs Danny mentioned earlier on that I worked on was this NEJM Knowledge Plus program, which is an adaptive assessment engine that customizes a learning path for individuals based on a combination of confidence and ability as adjudicated by a series of multiple choice items. But what happens is when you look at competence and confidence, many healthcare professionals who participate in that program show substantial overconfidence in very basic areas. And they can't answer basic questions to the full effect accurately. Overconfidence, when you have low ability, is prone to produce errors. Because if you think, listen, I'm really good at putting in central lines, and you're really not very good at putting in central lines, boy, do you create problems. And that's true whether you're doing a hand manipulation as an occupational therapist or whether you're doing diabetology. But what's also interesting is that for high performers, inappropriately low self-confidence creates vacillation, uncertainty, over-testing, all sorts of problems. So the more in which you can help people be aware of where they have strengths, and there are many of them, and this room is full of people who have a multitude of strengths, but help them be more aware of where they have strengths so they don't have to second guess themselves so much, and more aware of where they have room for growth, you can really begin to customize professional development for the community that helps them practice mastery. To do that, you really have to go back to some of the first principles of how we think about learning and driving learning engineering. If you think about learning at the start, if you imagine yourself in a room at a party and you're trying to remember people's faces, obviously the instructional presentation is the parade of faces and maybe the names that are coming at you associated with those faces. That information, of course, goes into your sensory memory. You kind of remember the face, and you're trying to remember the name associated with it. That's your working memory, is the association between those two things, the name and the face. But you know if you try to remember more than one phone number at a time, that your working memory is pretty poor. It's able to absorb information rapidly. It's able to process that information rapidly, but you can't put too much in it because it gets exhausted very quickly. So what you have to do is move things very quickly from working memory into long-term memory. And the way you do that, you know this, is you practice. You make associations, you try and remember it, you rehearse it, you repeat it, and then it goes into longer-term memory. But it also dissipates from long-term memory pretty quickly unless you practice retrieval and rehearsal and you remind yourself or you put a story to it or have other anchors that make it memorable. In many cases, when we think about constructing educational programs, we're trying to get people to select information from what we're presenting to them, like these slides are a visual presentation to you. I'm trying to get you to remember the pathway of learning that occurs for adults as they absorb information. But we have to get you driving information in educational presentations away from organizing it only, and hopefully giving them a scaffold on which your community can organize the information so that it then is integrated, usually in many cases in healthcare professions through case-based learning, into the longer-term memory. And that's the challenge that we have to avoid this problem of the forgetting curve. The forgetting curve in medicine and in learning is punishing because information is often coming at our clinician community so fast and so repeatedly, emails, updates from their society, information from a colleague, something they read online, a journal article that just came through the door, some feedback they just got from a colleague in the OR, whatever it is displacing new information all the time. And the forgetting curve is going to punish new information that's absorbed. High stakes examinations, for example, induce the binge and purge approach to learning. And we know that the information retained from that type of studying, like we promote in medical school, is desperately ineffective. It's desperately ineffective and probably counterproductive in many cases because we don't engage in thinking about human learning. We just fill working memory. We try and push it into long-term memory, but we don't go back to rehearsal, retrieval, practice for a long time. So we have to think about how we design educational programs and move away from one and done type activities to curricula, to rehearsal, reminders, systems of reinforcement that allow us to engage with people for the long term. And organizations like this have that terrific capacity because your people are here. And they're not going to a conference in New York City or in Houston. They're here, and you can keep engaging with them in micro bits. Reminders that come from the end of an exercise that you did about heart failure management and say, don't forget, last week we looked at heart failure, don't forget your diuretics and your beta blockers and blah, 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 because it's very helpful for your patients with heart failure. Those types of reminders end up being very important for consolidating information and creating an infrastructure that supports meaningful change. But ultimately, of course, you have to reinforce deliberate practice. And deliberate practice is not just playing the same wrong note on the violin 10,000 times, because that's not going to get you anywhere. It's playing the note on the violin and somebody saying to you, that's the wrong note. Stop playing that note, put your fingers here. And helping to learn how to play one note, second note, third note. And the same is true in medicine, just like it is in ice dancing. In ice dancing, they have the benefit of falling over all the time, so they get immediate feedback if they get it wrong. In medicine, we're not so good at doing deliberate practice because our feedback systems are not so great. Our feedback systems rely on us being able to identify the errors in our practice patterns, or somehow getting feedback from a registry or some sort of data system, or feedback from peers that says, not good behavior, not appropriate care, something bad happened to the patient, and to try and help people see where potentially they made mistakes. And talking about mistakes is therefore very powerful as a way of learning, and that's why CPCs and other things, when done right, can be very powerful to help us. Surgeons have known this for years. So we have to evolve the continuing education environment to really think about a different approach to overcoming the many challenges that our clinician community have, the real insights that we have about how adults learn, and bringing those together so we create a much more nimble and effective longitudinal professional development resource system that allows for intellectual and professional fulfillment through a system that allows individuals to be supported towards mastery. And if you can do those things by bringing fulfilling educational programs, you can really drive meaningful process improvement. Now, part of this, though, is not just us doing things for the learner, but it's also acculturating the learner. It's the things the healthcare professional, again, physician-centric, apologies for that, but it's the things that the learner must do for themselves. Just think about that question about who here is an above-average learner or driver, or indeed, who here is a below-average diabetologist or clinician. Not many feel like they have that much room to improve. You put up a series of information that looks vaguely familiar to them, their eyes will scan it. It's like a journal article, they'll say, I kind of think I know most of that, I know most of that, But will they get the things that they don't know in that? No, because they'll see ACE inhibitor and beta blocker and diuretic and say, yeah, I know heart failure. But in fact, they do not. And we don't challenge them to say, well, hold on a second, tell us how you'd manage this particular case in this patient who's still diaphoretic and breathless on this dose, and et cetera, et cetera. So we have to acculturate humility. And humility in a culture in healthcare professions is desperately needed, because we have to be aware that we don't know what we need and then be able to address it. And then there's things that the environment must do to support the healthcare professionals so they can be at their best. So the other thing that we need to become more self-aware, in addition to humility, what comes to mind? Curiosity, all right? Now, burned out people, are they curious? No, not particularly. Are extremely busy people curious? Well, sometimes. But you've got to be motivated for mastery, and you've got to acculturate that. We've talked about a little bit of humility. These are some of the most powerful questions that you can actually ask that demonstrate a combination of curiosity and humility. And they are about as normal in the healthcare professions, or at least they have been normalized and encouraged in the healthcare professions for a long time. But we run the risk of losing this approach to thinking about driving humility and curiosity, because we are increasingly driven by RVUs, and we're increasingly doc in the box, and we're isolated amongst a crowd. And when we don't do this, we're in trouble. Because norming with a peer who's has similar expertise as you is extremely powerful. Sometimes if you two clinicians talking to each other, let's say there's two physical therapists talking to each other, and one asks the other one of these questions, can I run this case by you? What's demonstrated in that question to the other physical therapist? What's demonstrated to that person by the other person who's asking the question? I need clarity. I'm humble. I trust you to tell me. I recognize you may have expertise I do not have. That's a very powerful statement right there. Just being asked, can I ask you a question, is a real marker of trust. What does it say for the person who's being asked about the person who's asking? That those things are true for them, but they also are curious enough to potentially learn something new. What happens if both people don't know the answer? Is that a problem? Not if you keep looking, exactly. But it also norms the fact that you're not abnormal for not knowing this. And that's powerful by itself. It says it's okay. You may not know what to do in this very complicated scenario, or this complicated scenario, or this simple scenario, but other people like you also don't know how to do it. But you got to keep looking. If the person can teach the person, this is what I would do because X and Y, is that a powerful experience? Hugely. Just reinforced a teaching arrangement or reinforced a mentorship-mentee. So these dyads that we need to facilitate in our environment are very powerful and very important. And acculturating this environment where it's okay to be interrupted in these very busy days in the OR, when you're doing a task because somebody wants help or asks for it, that's really essential. And that's got to be led by, master teachers, master educators, master clinicians, and others showing that, yes, this is okay, and modeling it amongst others. And then the other skill, of course, is thinking out loud. So I'll just kind of finish up on a couple of things about the way in which we construct educational environments and tell you a bit about some of the things ACCME is doing to try and help. But I put this together because I was talking to a colleague about how I try and think about educational design to try and address many of the things we've just been talking about. And in many cases, we focus on this red circle here in the learning curve when we think about educational design, because we want to create effective and efficient learning experiences. But in fact, we should be thinking across the spectrum of educational design. How are we going to get this person interested? How are we going to inspire curiosity for these busy clinicians to want to come to our session, or to go online, or to participate in a small group upstairs on the 9th floor, or something else? And that's hard. And it means mentoring, it means inspiring, it means provoking, it means stimulating them to think something might be interesting to learn. And it can be as simple as changing presentation titles. So rather than the case of the month or an update in heart failure, it's the 44-year-old patient with refractory heart failure despite best practices. That's suddenly much more interesting and compelling to think about, well, I'm going to learn some mastery here. I'm going to learn some wisdom, not just going to get general updates about heart failure because I already know heart failure. It's different. So starting with the start and inspiring curiosity in whatever way you can be really helpful. The next thing is, if you've ever watched, particularly our junior learners, if you don't engage them, they're on their phones in 5 seconds. And thank you for not being on your phones, by the way. Sometimes I look around and I'm like, lots of phones on the chair. Anyway, but you got to engage them once you have them. And that means it's got to be from a trusted person who can share good information. It's got to be relevant. So that's why the case method is very useful. We can all pull relevance out of a case. Meaningful and efficient. If it starts to be laborious, people will shut down. So constructing educational environments so they start getting information or start getting problem solving or skills or group work early in the activity so they feel the engagement and they feel the efficiency is useful. Then create a powerful learning experience so that it builds on prior experience, it's progressive, it's increasingly personalized, so it allows them to derive context as relevant to them, allows for practice, provides feedback, and then you get them at the end by consolidating the support mechanism. The learning, whatever it was, be supported. The reminder for the ACE inhibitors for the heart failure is on the EMR, and there's a notice on the wall saying, don't forget the diuretics in your patients. Whatever it is that allows for repetition, reminding, reflection, and hopefully measurement and reward for providing excellent outcomes. But essentially all we've been talking about is moving to a mastery model of thinking about mastery learning. There are many colleagues, including Bill McGahey, who's at Northwestern with me, who writes about this. And it can be really effective. The one key thing that I'll point you to here is this really important word that we often forget: effortful activities. Right? We sometimes think CME and CEUs and everything should be easy because that'll create engagement. If it's easy, it's probably pointless. Because in order to learn, you have to do cognitive work. And we often worry that if we don't play games or we don't get participatory active learning, then it's not going to be effective. And you're right. You've got to make active environments that are cognitively more challenging. Simple passive displays of information, unlikely to be meaningful because we can't trust individuals to rehearse and play with that information and provide what-ifs and other contexts around it without support. So effective educational environments are tiring. So if you think of a master clinician based on some of the things we've been talking about, what are things you see master clinicians do that are especially interesting? Some of you in this room are master clinicians, and you can say some of the things you do or what your mentors and others did that you think are very effective. What makes a master clinician? Patterns of behavior seem to be demonstrable. Okay, they're approachable. So they're personable. What else? They pursue perfection. I think that's right. I'm thinking of the master clinicians I've seen. They pursue perfection, but they don't assume perfection. Certainly in their own activities, they have the humility you'd expect for someone who never feels they are quite getting there. What else? What do master clinicians do? What do you see them do that helps them become masters? Okay. So master clinicians are often also teachers. And that's no big surprise because teaching is an important form of consolidating information. and expressing it, and articulating it, and teaching another person is a really important way of actually embedding that information in your own brain, amongst the most effective things we have to do that. So they often are, in fact, teachers as well, because it's actually a good strategy for driving your own performance. I will tell you, as a course director for endocrinology at Harvard for many years, my students provoked me and prodded me and inspired me with the most crazy questions about metabolism that forced me to learn endocrinology in a way that I had never understood it before. and it's terrific. That's what an academic environment's all about. Other things about master clinicians, so they're generally humble, they generally pursue mastery, they often express mastery through repetition, like in teaching, and consolidation of information. I think you'll often find that they are reflective about their own practice. Because they are looking for perfection, and they are humble, they're often evaluating themselves all the time. And they don't take their activity for granted, and they practice. And whether they get feedback from others or from themselves, they're often looking for that type of information. And that's the type of acculturation we're really looking to do. So a few words about what we're doing at ACCME to try and help drive these processes forward and help you as educators do better in the CE space. You know, we've talked about several of them today, and maybe even rather than sharing these slides with you, we've certainly been working to support educators through educational programming. So our meetings are not about accreditation standards, et cetera. They're all about driving professional practice for educators and helping you express those skills in useful ways. We've been creating important alignments with our colleagues in other professions so that the accreditation processes, like several of us have been talking about today, are aligned, and the expectations of the different accreditors are very similar. That allows educational programming to be constructed that meets the needs of multiple different types of professional audiences, so we don't have siloed or unique requirements that make it impossible for interprofessional education to be planned. And indeed, as we've talked about with several groups today, we've created the joint accreditation pathway for organizations so they can go one accreditation pathway and meet the needs of multiple professions. Number three, on the medicine side, we've been working with a lot of boards so that we take that same approach of alignment and then data transfer with the boards. So there's real opportunities for free to give out MOC credits for those who are interested in that, and physicians who are participating with the board, so that activities that you're already doing count for MOC, and our data systems are able to transfer the credits immediately for learners who are completing your activities. We're also evolving our commendation criteria for accredited providers so that they see the strategic layout of what an effective CE provider is doing. And there's a range of option commendation criteria, which many have seen and used as a strategic plan for themselves, so they can pick out items of ways in which they're going to develop as an organization, how they're going to invest in their educators, how they're going to drive process improvement in their organization, how they're going to do individualized learning plans within their organization, how they're going to create interprofessional activities, engage students and other learners in their work, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing we've been doing is working with the government to ensure that educational programming, particularly those aligned with quality improvement, count for multiple types of outcomes and credits and incentives, including incentive payments around quality improvement projects aligned with the macro legislation and CMS's MIPS program. And CE activities that you can do for free and register, we had accepted by CMS as a process for which educational providers like UTMB can issue the type of MIPS credits that avoid the penalties and payments from CMS that you will get if you don't participate in the quality improvement programs that CMS recognizes, including that in accredited CE. Those are some kind of brief highlights, but fundamentally, as an organization, my hope is that you'll not just think about evolving your educational strategy, and at least build one, but you'll increasingly start thinking about managing this extremely precious resource of your people. and supporting them with effective educational programs that can transform the learning environment and create meaningful change for them and for the community that addresses not just performance issues and quality issues, but issues related to burnout and professional satisfaction. If you can do those things, you will have created an environment that is flourishing, that drives to quality, where we take care of each other, and that we support each other so that we can be at our mastery level. And if ACCME is here helping you to do that, then we'll have achieved our goal, but most importantly, you will have achieved your goal to be a premier health center and to provide exceptional care to exceptional people. So thanks very much for your time today. Love to take whatever questions you have, and hopefully you'll take home some ideas and opportunities that you can apply to your own educational and clinical practice to help you be at the top of your game. Thanks. Sure. Yeah.
You talk about CME a little differently than we're used to seeing it. We see it as a moneymaker. So how do you propose making this change now, getting away from this being an income-generating enterprise to a more development and learning type exercise?
Yeah, the money doesn't matter, does it?
Yeah.
So the key thing is that in many cases, organizations like this have been responsible to make their CE units revenue positive or at least revenue neutral, when almost nothing that I've just talked about is demonstrably revenue positive, and in fact could readily be a substantial money sink. If you're talking about paying educators to spend time with their colleagues and teach them and mentor them, et cetera, that's lost productivity, lost efficiency in practice, and could be a huge problem. But just think about the opposite. What do you gain if you actually create this culture in terms of performance improvement, quality management, quality incentives from payers and others, because you delivered higher quality care, but also you've reduced turnover, you've improved retention, and you know the cost of hiring a replacement staff, and you've created a culture of collegiality and interprofessionalism, reduced burnout, improved productivity because you reduced burnout, and it's individually, all of those statements I just made to you have been proven in other institutions. I can show you institutions that have reduced their turnover by educational implementation as part of an overall change in the I can show you organizations that have improved quality, the yin-yang for using educational interventions, et cetera. But the important thing is using education as a values center rather than as a revenue center, and realizing that your educators and your community are an important resource in which you have to invest to support, or else it'll come back and haunt you. Because an increasingly isolated, separated, disengaged, ambivalent, and complacent community, I don't think is where UTMB wants to go. And education can be the solution, and you have so many of the resources you already need to do these types of interventions. Look at the academies that you have. Look at your opportunities and your investment in interprofessionalism. You have lots of things in place that are already the solutions that you need. The key thing, though, is not thinking about your CE units as outward-facing, but as also, at least, inward-facing and as a value center. Other questions?
Well, Dr. McMahon, I want to maybe while people warm up, that's one of the best talk I've ever heard, so thank you very much. I think it's very stimulating. I really think it's going to help us. We're going to make sure people see that later on. So this is a little bit off. I guess I have two questions there. Where do folks get started? And the other piece, which is, I'd love to find about the questions you might ask them. People in surgery are talking about having observers and coaches and those kind of things. I'd like to hear your opinion about having that kind of person be engaged in performance improvement.
Sure. So getting started is is not that hard. It's about finding a committed educator or a committed division chair who wants to do something with their staff to help them. And it might start with just assessing burnout levels or asking the staff to identify their anticipated learning needs for the coming year. We talked about that a little bit, essentially for your annual appraisals, identifying for all staff, what do you plan to build this year and how do you plan to do it? You ask those two questions once a year and somebody accumulates several of those, they can start to see patterns and trends where they can identify a bottoms-up need to build a communications program or a QI program or an interdisciplinary, you name it. But also then creating that expectation that we are not complacent, that everyone should be building their skills all the time. If you then roll that information up to the CE unit, they can start to see patterns. The next thing then is building an educational plan for the CE unit that should preferably be interprofessional. You should probably be bringing together your nurse planners, your OT planners, your interprofessional planners into a singular unit, so you have educational strategy for the organization harmonized in a place that allows you to think about education more nimbly as an organization rather than in the silos we've traditionally put it in. I think acculturating this idea that we help each other and we look at each other and we periodically observe each other is something that you can require if you want to make people be in the Academy of Master Teachers, for example. We talked earlier on about requiring people who want to be in that academy to do at least 2 observations of a peer or a colleague a year. And as we also talked about in the session with the Academy members, those observations don't have to be laborious or long. You can usually see all you need to see for a teacher in 6 or 10 minutes. And yes, that's still time out of somebody's calendar, but in terms of professional skill and somebody looking over your shoulder and saying, huh, it's interesting how you move that scalpel, Dr. Jacobs. I mean, you literally can see essential components of a procedure or a communication, but it doesn't have to be in a lecture hall. And in many cases, some of the most effective ways that I've worked with faculty development is to step into the ambulatory clinic where they're seeing a patient with the resident and watch them interact with each other and watch them with the patient, literally for 5 minutes. And you see a lot. Are they thinking out loud? Are they allowing the student to learn in a particular way? Or just sitting with a colleague and saying, how do you approach patients with this problem in diabetes? So the more in which you can do that, one of the ways in which you can do it is to give credit for those things, because that gives you the opportunity to track it. And you can start to say, if you're talking with peers and learning is happening, make sure you register for credit and make it straightforward to give credit for those things. It can be really helpful.
UTMB Health, working together to work wonders.